Hello, I'm Cath and this is made by Cath Craft. Welcome to my channel and also to this video, which is a sewing pattern review video. So today I'm going to be talking all about a new sewing pattern that's just been released by Forget Me Not Patterns, and it is their Kelly shirt dress pattern. I'll hold up the front of their pattern instructions so you can see what their Kelly shirt dress looks like. So I've sewed up a version of the Kelly and I've got lots to say about it. So I thought I'd do a video talking all about it. I do also have a discount code to share with you so that you can get 20% off the Kelly shirt dress pattern, and that discount code is valid until the 5th of July. So keep watching and I'll be sharing that code towards the end of the video. You will notice I'm not actually wearing my Kelly shirt dress. I've got a different pattern I'm wearing today. I have got my shirt dress right here. I thought it'd be easier to have it on the hanger so I could hold it up to the camera and show you all of the details to the dress. And also today here in the south of England, it is very hot. We're having a mini heat wave this week. And I just thought I'd get a bit too hot in my Kelly too. So I've got something very, very summery on instead. But I will be putting lots of pictures in of the Kelly as well. So you'll be able to see just what it looks like on me. And yeah, I'll be showing you all the details. So that is the plan for this video. Before I get started, I will just mention briefly what sewing pattern I am wearing today, because I know you often do want to know. This is a simplicity pattern, is this pattern here, the K1355A. I think the pattern has actually since been rebranded and I've got the older version, so you might find it online instead as a Simplicity 9125, and I will link the new version of the pattern down below. But it's a really lovely woven pattern for summery weather, and I'm wearing version C here, which is for this maxi dress. It's got an elasticated waistband and a sort of flowy skirt with a slit at the front, and then quite a blousey bodice. And the feature I particularly like about this pattern is this halter neck neckline, which you can see it's got this little tie that creates the neckline, and then you tie it at the front and it's sort of cinched in at the front and the back too. So it's perfect dress to wear in very warm weather like we've got today, and I'll put up a picture just of me wearing it today so you can see the full dress. And I made my version in a lovely sort of quite tropical print viscose that I got quite a while ago from Rainbow Fabrics. So that's what I'm wearing today, but now I'll get started on my review of the Kelly shirt dress sewing pattern. And actually the Kelly shirt dress is the first pattern I've tried by Forget Me Not Patterns. I had seen a few of their previous patterns go by on Instagram and I had admired them and liked the style of them. And I will link their website down below in case you fancy checking out all of their previous patterns. They do have some really lovely ones that I've been very tempted by in the past. I think it's one of those things I've just not got around to trying them to date. And then Forget Me Not Patterns got in touch with me and they asked me if I'd like to receive an advance copy of the Kelly shirt dress. And they showed me the line drawings and I just loved the look of it. If you've followed my channel for a while, you know I love a shirt dress. And when I saw this one, I thought it had some really, really pretty details. I couldn't wait to get started sewing it. I should mention, I did receive a small fee in exchange for sewing it up and in exchange for an Instagram post too. But to be honest, I'd have wanted to get this pattern anyway. It's very, very me, so that was just a real bonus. And I felt really lucky to have been asked. So yeah, I really, really was glad to give it a try. And I'll put a picture up of my Kelly dress now, just so you can see what it looks like before I start talking about all of the details. So yeah, let me show you the pattern. Now I've shown you my version so I can go into all the details. So the Kelly shirt dress is a woven shirt dress pattern. It's got a fitted bodice which has darts at the front and also at the back on the waist too, and a button down front that goes all the way down the bodice and the skirt. It's then got a lightly gathered skirt which you can make in two different lengths. The sleeves have a puff top and then there's a short sleeve option and a 3/4 option. And it's got a band collar, and a lovely detail of this pattern I think is this V-shaped insert on the bodice that you get on the front and back of the bodice. And you can add an optional ruffle that goes all the way around the front and back around that V shape. And when I saw the pattern, I just knew I wanted to try the version with the ruffle. I just really love that detail. So it's a very pretty pattern. It has got quite a fitted bodice, and I think recently I've seen quite a lot of more looser fit patterns, so I thought this is quite nice and something a little bit different. And it's got quite a few just lovely details to it and new things I hadn't tried before, so I was excited to get started on it. So I'll talk about the sizing of the pattern first. It has a really good size range, this pattern. It's available in a size 28 up to a 56, which takes you up to bust of 55.5 inches. And one thing I particularly like about this pattern is that it comes in 3 different bust sizes. So there's a small, a medium and a full bust. And when it comes to the fit and sizing, there's loads of information included in this pattern to help you choose just the right fit for you, which I really appreciate, and I really enjoyed reading through it. It talks all about the ease that's been given at different parts of the pattern as well, just so you can get an idea of exactly how tight it's going to be, and so you can pick the perfect size for you. It also takes you through how to measure your bust, and I did this, I used their method and remeasured for this pattern. I like to do that for every new pattern I'm trying if it does have different bust categories, because I think sometimes different pattern companies can categorize it slightly differently. So I did all my measurements afresh. I found that I was a medium bust, which is the equivalent of a B to C cup. And then I had a look at the sizing, and based on my medium bust, I found that would put me as a size 32 on the bust, and my waist size would put me as a size 34, and then my hip size would put me back as a size 32. But I think on this pattern, because it's a gathered skirt, the hip measurement's a little bit less critical, because there'll be plenty of room there due to the gathering. So if you're a couple of sizes different on the hip, you probably wouldn't need to consider adjusting for that area. The bust and waist measurements I think are more critical because the bodice is quite fitted. And just for reference, my measurements are bust 32, waist 26, hips 36. So I had to think about what size I wanted to go for and whether I wanted to grade from a 32 bust out to a 34 waist. And what I decided to do in the end was to sew a straight size 34. And the reason I decide that is because sometimes I find I've got a small bust but quite angular shoulders. So sometimes I find when I opt for the smaller size, it can end up being a little bit tight around the shoulders. So I thought what I'd do is go for the straight size 34 to give me that little bit of extra room there. And then I thought I could always adjust the seam lines slightly at the sides to bring in the bust a bit if I needed to. What I also like about this pattern actually is they do mention with the seam allowances, they have different seam allowances depending on the part of the garment you sew. So the pattern has 1 centimetre seam allowances throughout the pattern except for the side seams and underarm seams, which have a 2 centimetre seam allowance, which gives an extra allowance to adjust the fit. So I thought that's quite a clever thing to add in. And I think it also encourages you to think about the fit through the process of sewing. So before I put the whole dress together, I tried on just the bodice at that stage, and I did adjust the seam lines slightly and bring them in a bit at the bust to tweak the fit. I think that's a great idea because it's easy sometimes to get really excited about sewing, sew the whole thing up with the seam allowance that they recommend, and then you get to the end and the fit isn't quite right, and it's much easier to tweak and just adjust those seams a little bit through the process of sewing. So I think that mentioning that does really encourage you to do that, which is quite important on a dress like this one where the bodice is quite fitted. So yeah, I found the straight size 34 worked quite well. I did have to take in the seams a little bit extra at the bust, like I mentioned, but I didn't find it affected the darts too much. I feel like the placement of the darts is still fine. That extra adjustment worked okay. So I think if or when I make this dress again, I would go for the straight size 34 again. In terms of other choices, I went for the short sleeve and I went for the longer length skirt. I kind of cut it out based on the longer length skirt, and part of me expected to actually shorten it a bit. But actually when I tried the dress on, I really like the balance of the bodice to the skirt with the longer length, so I thought I'd keep it like that. I do really like it. I'll put another picture up just so you can see where the skirt comes down to on me, and I'm 5'6" for reference. I do often lengthen the bodice on patterns because I do have a longer torso, but I actually held up the pattern pieces of this pattern next to another pattern that I like the bodice length on me of, where it just kind of nips in right around my natural sort of waist. And I found the pieces look quite similar, so I didn't end up lengthening the bodice, and I'm quite happy actually with where the bodice comes down to, so I'm glad I didn't make a lengthening adjustment there. So that's all of the details on the sizing of the Kelly shirt dress. And the next thing that I wanted to talk about is fabric choice. So the Kelly is designed for light to medium weight, non-stretch woven fabrics, and a few examples of good fabrics that are included in the pattern instructions are chambray, poplin, shirting, double gauze, stable viscose or rayon and linen. And I made my version of the Kelly shirt dress in a lovely cotton lawn fabric that I already had in my stash. but it hadn't been sitting in my stash for very long. I think I got it possibly on the May Day sales early in May, and I got it from Fabric Godmother. It was on a really good special offer, and I saw the fabric and I didn't have a particular plan for it, but I thought it would make a lovely shirt dress. So when I was then asked if I'd like to start the Kelly shirt dress, I thought it was just meant to be. I'd got enough to make a shirt dress because I thought that is probably what this fabric is going to become at some point in the future. So this is the fabric here. It's a really nice, soft, lightweight cotton lawn with this navy base, and then the sort of print is, I'm not sure if they're cherries or little round flowers, but they're kind of in a pretty peachy colour with little green stalks, and I think they create quite a pretty ditzy effect, and I thought it would make quite a soft, sort of feminine, floaty looking shirt dress, especially with the added ruffle. I found cotton lawn worked really well for this pattern. I do love cotton lawn because it's quite lightweight, but it's also quite stable. So for all of the little details, it was quite easy to sew them accurately because the fabric didn't shift around too much. And it's ended up with quite a nice light, breezy feeling shirt dress. And I think because it's a lightweight fabric, the ruffle is quite soft. It doesn't it's not too sort of sticking out too much. It sort of sits quite flat. And also there's a gentle puff to the sleeve. And again, I think the cotton lawn creates quite a soft effect there. It's not too much big sleeve energy, which isn't totally my thing. I mean, the puff here is a subtle one anyway, but I think if you went for a slightly thicker or slightly more crisp fabric, it might just be a little bit more of a feature than it is on my version. So yeah, it was a lovely fabric to sew with. I went for just plain navy buttons down the front there because I wanted to create quite a classic shirt dress that would be quite timeless. And yeah, it was a lovely fabric to sew with. I'm not sure if it is still in stock at Fabric Godmother because it was on special, so I'm not sure if they were trying to sort of use up the last of it, and it was a really good price. If it is in stock, I'll link it down below. Otherwise, I'll link their current cotton lawn selection. But yeah, it was a great fabric choice for this pattern. I think it worked really well. And I think with it being quite a lightweight fabric, it'll work quite well in sort of warmer months. Not today, which is really boiling, but on a slightly cooler summer's day, I think this dress would work really nicely with a pair of sandals. But I also think because the navy colour, it will work quite well in winter too, and I could easily layer it up with a cardigan and some tights, and it will keep me cosy on a colder day too. So I like how it's created quite a versatile shirt dress. In terms of how much fabric you need for this pattern, my size, which was sizes 28 to 40, if you have 140 centimetre wide fabric, which this fabric is, the pattern says you need 2.7 metres. I only ended up needing 2 metres for this short sleeved dress, so I guess you might need a bit more if you're making the 3/4 sleeve one, but I did make the version with the long skirt, and I did include the pockets, which are included in this pattern, so yeah, I was really quite pleased. I managed to squeeze out of a little bit less, so I guess that's worth knowing. I must admit, I don't often follow the actual cutting layout that the actual pattern recommends. I generally do a bit of pattern Tetris myself and figure out what I think is the best way of getting the pattern piece out the smallest amount of fabric. So yeah, I'm not sure I exactly followed their way of doing it to get it out for 2 metres, but I did get it out of 2 metres. I think I did have 2.5 metres anyway, but now I've got a little bit left over to play with. I don't know what I'll do with that extra fabric, maybe pocket bags on another project or something else. I always find cotton lawn's quite a useful thing to have in your stash. But yes, that is the fabric I used. I do think if you went for a viscose or a rayon fabric, it would up the ante on this pattern a little bit and make it a little bit more tricky because it is quite a tailored pattern. And I think it's nice to be able to get all the details like the collar and inset in the sleeves done really sharply and evenly. And I think, yeah, if you made it in a slightly more drapey fabric, it would be a little bit more of a challenge, but I think it would be doable because the instructions are really good on this pattern. But I thought a cotton lawn was a good bet for my first try, and yeah, I'm really happy with how it turned out. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about for this pattern was the skill level. And for Get Me Not patterns, rate this pattern as an advanced level pattern. I think because there are quite a few tailoring details in it, including the band collar, the button placket, setting in the sleeves, and also if you do choose this ruffle, that was quite fiddly, particularly getting this V at the back to lie flat when you sort of sew the ruffle in. I had to do that a couple of times over to get a result I was quite happy with in the end. That was definitely a very fiddly point to this pattern. So yes, I can see why they rate it as an advanced level pattern, but I have to say I found the instructions amazing on this pattern. As I mentioned before, it was my first time sewing a Forget-Me-Not Patterns pattern, and I was super impressed with the level of detail included. And I do think because of how much the pattern does hold your hand through and all of the useful hints and tips along the way, it does make it a lot more easy to tackle than maybe an advanced level pattern by a sewing company who didn't include that level of information. So yeah, I would say I was a bit nervous when I realised it was an advanced level pattern, but I didn't have anything to worry about because the instructions were really, really superb. One thing I particularly liked is there was lots of information about, with this pattern, I think it is sort of fairly tailored and fitted, all of the seam allowances and the amount you need to turn up things by need to be really accurate. And a few points during the pattern, they recommended basting lines before you sew the final seams or before you press the final seams, so you can press up just the right amount. And I found that really useful. It did make the whole process of sewing this garment a bit more lengthy, having to add the basting lines in and then sort of, before you sort of do iron up and get everything in place. But it meant that everything ends up really, really accurate. And I think you need that when you're sewing a garment is a bit more tailored and you want just the right fit. So I really appreciated all of those tips through. Just take that extra time doing basting to mark the lines and getting everything really, really accurate. In terms of interfacing, I thought I'd mention as well, because the pattern includes places you definitely need to interface and places you can optionally interface. And so I only used interfacing where it was you definitely needed it. I didn't add the optional interfacing. For example, with the collar band, they recommend you use a slightly stiffer interfacing for the outer collar, and then for the inside collar, you can either interface with a lighter weight interfacing or choose not to interface at all. And I chose not to interface at all because I thought my fabric, with the one layer of interfacing on the outside, would have enough structure around the collar, and I'm quite happy with that. I think if I had added an extra layer of interfacing on the inside of the collar, it might have felt a bit too stiff and crisp compared to the rest of the garment, and I think it holds its shape nicely, you can see. Talking about the collar also, what I actually really liked about the collar was the method for sewing the collar in this pattern. They talk about using a fashion industry method where you sew the inner collar first and then you top stitch on the outer collar, so you can see on the outer collar all the way around the top, you've got an top stitching line there. And I just found the collar went in so smoothly using that method, and it gives a lovely clean finish on the outside, and also no sort of stitching in the ditch or trying to catch the collar on the inside because it was already sewn down. So I really like that method, and I did think it gave a lovely finish. I have to admit, there is one bit on this garment I'm not totally happy with, and it's also related to the collar, but it's nothing at all to do with the pattern instructions or the pattern. It's all to do with me and a slight mistake I made. Once I put in all my buttonholes, which you do right at the end, I used some, fray check liquid on the buttonholes to sort of make sure they're not going to fray before I then sort of cut them open. And somehow I got an extra splodge of fray check on the front here, right next to the buttonhole. You might be able to see this little lighter patch here. I've tried my best to do something to totally remove that fray check, but it's just left a slight mark there. I was really disappointed actually when it happened because I was so happy with how this whole pattern is sewn up, and I felt like I was really happy with myself for being quite accurate all over, and it just went really smoothly thanks to the great instructions and the great pattern pieces. So I was so disappointed to feel like I'd almost fallen at the last hurdle there and end up with a little stain on the front collar there. But since I tried the dress on and worn it, actually I've become less conscious of it, and I think it's one of those things probably only I would notice, I hope. But I did mention before, I have got a bit of fabric left over actually, so if I do find it's bothering me or if anyone else even mentions it or anything like that, then there's the option for me to take the collar out and insert a new collar using some of the extra leftover fabric. But I was a bit disappointed. I've never had that issue with fray check before. I've always found, even if I have got a splodge slightly inaccurately, I found it just sort of dries the same colour as the fabric, so I felt a bit unlucky this time that didn't happen. It sort of left a sheen, and then rubbing it has taken a bit of the colour off, and so I was a bit disappointed, especially since it's right at the front there, but I don't think it is too noticeable. And like I said, I have got a backup plan to redo it if I do need to, but I am loath to because the collar went in really smoothly, but I'm sure it'll go in smoothly again, fingers crossed if I did try again. But I thought I mentioned that even though it all came together really nicely, there's still a little imperfection, and I guess that is what sometimes makes garments handmade, the joy of it not being totally perfect. maybe. So yes, but yeah, generally the instructions are really, really great. And one other detail I really liked in this pattern actually was the waist gathering. And when you cut out the pattern pieces for the skirt, there are notches, and you only gather between the notches when you're doing the gathering to fit the skirt to the bodice, which means around the edge here at the side, you don't have any gathering. So you have gathering at the front and then again, gathering at the back. And also the gathering stops here, to the front here, where the button placket is at the front. And I thought it was a really lovely detail of this pattern because it creates a really beautiful silhouette for this dress, because having no gathering at the sides means it hangs really beautifully. It's not sort of sticking out at the sides or sticking out around the button placket where it's a little bit more bulky at the top. So I thought the way of placing the gathering there was really lovely and a lovely detail. Another really lovely detail, or interesting detail I guess, that I thought I'd share is the way that the sleeve cuffs are finished. I thought you just turn them up and sew them over, as I'm used to doing on most sort of garments I've sewed are woven and don't have kind of a cuff at the bottom. But actually the way you finish this sleeve is actually to add a facing on the inside, so you can see the facing there. And the facing is interfaced. So you end up with a really clean sleeve finishing here with no stitching line. And it also kind of adds a little bit of structure, so it sort of hangs quite nicely. As you can see, it doesn't kind of crumple. The interfacing gives it a little bit of body there, which I thought was a really lovely, interesting detail. They did recommend you sort of stitch in the ditch down this seam line on the underarm of the sleeve, just under here, to kind of hold the facing in place. And I did find when I was putting the dress on, I was finding it a bit annoying that the facing would sort of pop out on the outer side. So what I ended up doing was just taking tiny little stitches through on a few other places around the bottom here, just to hold the facing in place so it doesn't sort of pop out. So now it's kind of secured every couple of inches around. But that's really subtle. I don't think you can see those stitches. I just tried to grab the smallest amount of thread to kind of hold them on. And I thought it was really interesting, slightly unusual way of finishing the sleeves. That, yeah, it was just a really lovely little detail and something different. So yeah, I thought I'd share that little detail too. I do like about this pattern how all those little details are really thought about. Also, they recommend stitching down the V at the back here, so this bit is stitched down so it doesn't sort of ruffle up, because I can imagine if you're sitting down it'd be quite easy for it to kind of get rucked up. So I stitched that down there in the centre again to hold it down, and that gives quite a nice finish, I think, to the ruffle at the back of this dress. So I'll put a couple more pictures up now of me wearing my Kelly shirt dress, just so you can see what it looks like from the back, and also so you can see the bodice closer up and see the fit there too. It was just such a lovely sew, this one. The instructions from Forget Me Not Patterns were second to none. They really made the whole process of sewing up an advanced level pattern feel really enjoyable and relaxed, and I felt like it just went really, really smoothly. It definitely makes me feel like I'd like to try some more patterns by Forget Me Not Patterns, because this one was just so enjoyable to sew up. And I love my finished dress. I think in this navy fabric with the subtle navy buttons, it's created quite a timeless shirt dress, and I hope I get lots of wear out of this one. I think I will. I think with the print being quite sort of busy, the ruffle is quite subtle on this dress. So I'd love to make this dress again and make a real feature out of that ruffle. I think that would work really well maybe in a plain fabric. I'd quite like to give that a try, the ruffle version in plain fabric. But I would also love to try the other version of the dress without the ruffle. I think that would give quite a different dress, where you kind of really sort of start the show with these angled seam lines, quite clean, simple lines. So yeah, I'd love to try that version and also make this version again. So it's definitely a pattern that I'd like to revisit, but I don't know which version I will make next. But yeah, it was just such an enjoyable sew. And what I really liked about it was, it felt like a pattern I could take my time over and really enjoy completing each step really accurately, and just having the whole process coming together gradually and quite in a satisfying way. It's very satisfying sew, I think. And I really enjoyed learning the different method for inserting the collar and a few other sort of tips and hints along the way for getting a good finish from quite a tailored shirt dress. So if you're looking for a pattern, you can really enjoy taking your time over and just building up gradually and getting all those details just right. And just really enjoying all the little details of sewing. I'd really recommend this pattern. It's a real good one. And if you are interested in sewing this pattern, I do have a discount code to share with you, so you can get 20% off the Kelly shirt dress. And the code is CathKelly20. And the code will be valid from the 20th of June until the 5th of July. All you need to do is go to the Forget Me Not Patterns website and pop in that code to get 20% off this pattern. So yeah, I'd really recommend it. It's a lovely pattern to sew up, very enjoyable, and a lovely finished dress too that I think is very, very wearable. So yes, thank you very much for joining me for this video. I hope you've enjoyed hearing all about the Kelly shirt dress, and I hope you found all my thoughts on the pattern useful if you're thinking of sewing up yourself. So yes, thank you very much for watching. I'll be back with another video again soon, but in the meantime, I hope you have a lovely day. Oh, and if you've enjoyed this video, please do like, and if you're new to my channel, I'd love it if you'd press the subscribe button too for more future sewing content. So thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!